In this video, I'm going to take a look at a few ways to build good hobby habits so that you become a more focused and productive hobbyist in the year ahead. I'm Benji and welcome to Benji's Hobbies. As we start a new year, we often reflect on what we have achieved in the previous 12 months, but also on things we'd like to change going into a new year. Whilst the new year is a great time to start building new positive habits because it marks a defined point in time, in reality there's no time like the present to start building some good hobby habits. So if you're not watching this in January 2021, then stick around anyway, I'm sure you'll find something useful. Whilst this video gives you loads of ideas of things to focus on to become more productive, it's important to understand that everyone is slightly different and that you don't need to work on every single one of these points that I mention. In fact, it's probably best if you simply focus on one change at a time, because that way you're more likely to succeed. Some of the ideas that I discuss might sound a bit heretical to some of you, but stick with me and let's see if we can make the next 12 months the most productive yet. So the first thing, and one big one for me, is having a defined workspace. Now, I am really lucky in that I have a whole shed to myself for my hobbies. This has been fantastic for my productivity as it's entirely my own space and not shared with anyone else. Other people will have desks where they're able to paint and build, and there are of course some of those out there who aren't fortunate enough to have a permanent space at all, but that really should not hold you back. Setting up and packing down a paint station each time you want to paint can be a real buzzkill and will almost certainly stifle any creativity you might be feeling. But all you really need is a tray such as this one, which I picked up pretty cheap at a local supermarket. There's plenty of room on it for my miniatures, my wet palette, brushes and the selection of paints that I intend to use. I sometimes take this into the house if I want to do some painting indoors or in front of the TV, and it's what I used to do before I had a permanent space to sit and paint. Once you're done with your painting session, you don't need to put everything away again. You can simply put the tray on a shelf, in a cupboard or anywhere out the way until you next want to do some painting. And Bob's your uncle, you're good to go again without the hassle of setting up. This leads me on to my next point, maintaining a tidy and clean hobby space. I don't know about you guys, but my hobby desk tends to get cluttered very quickly, especially while I'm working on bigger projects, whether that's with bits of sprue, paints that you've finished using, unfinished miniatures, or more recently for me, discarded resin supports from my 3D prints. There's nothing worse than wanting to start a hobby session and realising that you have to tidy up the mess you made previously before you can even start. In fact, it can be seriously off-putting. So I have personally started working to a clear desk policy, where I make myself clear my desk before I finish any hobby session. This includes putting away all my paints, cleaning my brushes thoroughly, emptying and rinsing my water pot, wiping up any spilled paints or washes, and binning any material that I'm done with, such as resin supports or bits of sprue. It makes the process of starting up my next hobby session so much more pleasant when I'm starting with a clear, tidy desk. Try it out. Future you will thank you, trust me. So up next on my list is a bit of a boring one, and it's knowing what you've got. So I think it's fair to say that almost every single hobbyist out there will have a pile of shame, mound of joy, tower of pleasure, or whatever you decide to call it. But I think it's very easy for us to forget what we've got. So now is the perfect time to take a look at your collection and remember what you've got stashed away. This year, I want to carry out a bit of an audit on what I've got and make some sort of catalogue of my collection so I know that what's there. Whilst I'm at it, I'll be labelling all the boxes of loose sprues and miniatures so I know exactly what's in each one of them. Not only will this remind me of what I have, but also where things are when I eventually come to look for them in the future. Which brings me on to my next question. Am I genuinely going to paint my entire backlog of miniatures? Am I really going to get round to that Warhammer Fantasy Warriors of Chaos Battalion box? If the answer is no, then why not look at rationalising your collection and parting with some stuff to fund new or current projects? The second-hand market is booming and there are plenty of places these days to sell off miniatures such as eBay or Facebook buy and sell groups. Most things in my backlog will of course have brought me joy at some time or another, otherwise I wouldn't have bought them. But if there was something that I bought just because it was cheap, came in a bundle or was bought as an impulse buy, then I'm certainly going to look at parting with it to clear some space and make some money in the coming year. So next up, let's talk about new projects. I I hear so many people talk about new year, new army, and whilst it's fun to build lists and go out and buy an entire new army, it's doing nothing to help you paint your current unfinished armies or projects, and in fact will more than likely just add to your unpainted pile as we've already discussed. Why not spend some time finishing off what you've already got rather than starting a brand new army? Or even better, why not use the promise of a new army as a reward for finishing what you're already working on? At the beginning of 2020, I made a commitment to myself that I'd paint twice as many miniatures as I bought, and I pretty much managed to stick to it throughout the year. I made a list of each of the miniatures that I painted, and also a list of the miniatures I bought, which I could then use to easily work out the ratio. This is something that I wholeheartedly plan on doing as we move into the new year as well, as it was a great way for me to push myself to get more painted if I wanted to justify picking up that brand new box set or new miniature that was coming out. Something else to think about is how you structure your projects, and this one can be very personal, and what works for some people may not work for others. However, I'm going to share with you guys what works for me. Personally, I tend to get very overwhelmed if I see stacks of boxes or piles and piles of unpainted miniatures gather on my desk, and this really does a number on my productivity, meaning that despite having more miniatures to paint, I tend to paint less of them, which is really counterproductive. To combat this, I now tend to buy armies in bits, so I'll buy a couple of units or a hero at a time, and won't buy any more until I've painted what I've already got. I also see people building vast armies of grey, post them online, and then they're never to be seen again. It's safe to assume that those miniatures never got painted and that project never got finished, so wouldn't it have just been better for them to only build what they intended to paint there and then, and leave the rest unbuilt? Not only would it have been easier to store, but if they wanted to sell the army on at a later date, pre-built models tend to sell for less than miniatures on sprue, so they could have recouped more of their costs. Which sort of leads me on to my next point, which is the number of projects that you should work on at once. I know a lot of people are happy to jump from one project to another and can quite happily do so, but for some people, working this way simply doesn't work. In fact, there is increasing scientific evidence that suggests that as the number of projects increases, productivity decreases as your focus becomes split between the different projects. My suggestion is rationalise the number of projects that you're working on at once, and only work on one or two until they're fully finished. That's not to say that you can't paint the odd palette cleanser from time to time to break up any monotony which inevitably comes with painting a single army. But working on 5 different armies at once simply doesn't work for most people. Where you can, you should always try to finish a project rather than leaving it half or mostly finished. Again, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that projects are far more difficult to pick up again at a later time than if you just finished them in the first place. So you should really put that last bit of effort in to finish a project if you can. I know I'm personally guilty of this, as I have so many half-painted miniatures that I really should get round to finishing them. If, however, you're finding that a project really isn't floating your boat and you're absolutely dreading finishing it, then there is no harm in stopping and moving on to something else. In fact, that can really help improve your productivity and workflow by allowing you to work on something that you really want to work on. But my advice would be to box up or put away your unfinished project rather than leaving it to stare at you from your desk, as you will always feel some level of subconscious anxiety that it's been left unfinished. And last but not least on my list of habits to help you become a more productive hobbyist is to paint every day. Now, I'm not talking about sitting down for 2 hours a day to practice. I'm talking about making sure that you are picking up a brush at least once a day, even for the shortest amount of time. I've already done a video on this, which you'll see a link to right now, so go and check that out after you finish this video, and you can see how you can get some great painting results in as little as 15 minutes a day. By painting infrequently, you lose any painting muscle memory, and as time progresses, it makes it even more difficult to pick up a brush. I know it can sometimes be really tough for me to motivate myself to get painting if I've not painted for a few weeks, and there will be that temptation to not paint at all. So by picking up a brush regularly, you can do wonders for your hobby motivation. My friend Andrew from the Beard Clipper YouTube channel was really inspired by my 15 minutes a day video, and has challenged me to paint for at least 20 minutes a day throughout January to start building a hobby streak and seeing what we can both get done. It would be great if you guys at home wanted to get involved too. All you have to do is do a minimum of 20 minutes hobby per day, and if you want, you can post your progress on Instagram or Twitter using the hashtag January 20 Minute Challenge. I hope you guys have found this video informative and useful, and I hope it helps you build some better hobby habits. If you have any other hobby productivity tips to share, then make sure you go and post them in the comment section below. I would love to see what advice you guys at home have to offer. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. See you later.